Hey everyone, today we're going to be ranking all 22 of the current killers in Dead by Daylight. In any video where killers are ranked like this, there is always a lot of dispute and debate, so just know that when I'm listing these, I'm just giving my own opinion and some of my own thoughts. If you disagree and you'd like to drop your own list in the comments, please do, because I'd love to see some discussion over this. It's subjective at the end of the day. For this list, also bear in mind that I'm going to rank these killers worst to best with all the player base in mind, so the killers will be ranked on how well they can perform when a new player plays them, as much as a rank 1 veteran player does. This is just to give a more rounded view, as often lists like this only focus on that top 1% of players. I'd like to think of this as a ranked list for everyone. Let's get into it. In the number 22 spot we have the Pig. I feel bad. It feels bad to put her this low, but in all honesty, the Pig has way too many drawbacks and not enough strengths to put her in a good position. Pig's main power is reverse bear traps. Traps she can place onto survivors which will explode after a fairly long timer and can only be taken off at jigsaw boxes scattered around the map. These boxes and the escape attempts for reverse bear traps are RNG based. RNG, or random number generation, is the bane of many killers' existences. Whenever RNG is involved, killers like the Pig become even weaker, RNG being a large part of her reverse bear trap, which will vary on how long it takes or how many tries it takes for you to remove them as a survivor. And the reason why this is so bad is that you can't really calculate properly different timings and work out a strategy for maintaining consistent pressure when you're relying on luck. Aside this, her secondary powers such as her stealth is actually quite restrictive, as it disallows you from attacking, makes you slower, and also restricts visibility by putting you closer to the floor. I'll admit that the Pig can be effective when played well, and it can also throw off a lot of lower skilled teams, as they're often prone to panicking when they get a trap put on them. However, Pig just simply does not have enough strength or pressure, and her reliance on RNG often makes her feel like she just isn't viable. In our number 21 we have the Demogorgon, although in my heart, he's number 1. I hate to put Demo this low, I really do. You'll find that's the case for most of these low killers, is that their powers are a lot of fun, but they just can't quite cut being top tier when they have to perform. Because Demo is for sure a lot of fun, however what he makes up for in fun he lacks in strength, in his abilities mainly. Demo's main power is his portals, which you can get a total of 6 of. These can be placed basically anywhere on the map as long as the surface is flat and large enough. And once you've placed them, you can tunnel your way between them whenever you want, as long as you're standing on a portal location. These portals can be really great when used effectively to get to certain areas and keep map pressure, helped by their very short cooldown. However, these portals stand out clearly and can be broken by survivors, so often you have to kind of get lucky for them to stay intact if you want them in good areas. Demo's other ability is Shred, an extended lunge attack. When using Shred, you actually move at 460% movement speed for this brief attack. This means you can get some very quick and also long range hits. You do have to be careful though, as it can be kinda clumsy, as once you commit to the attack, you can't adjust it midway, meaning the attack is quite easy to dodge. Demo's main downfall is the lack of power in his portals and Shred ability. Blight is coming in for our number 20 spot. Blight is a fairly new killer, and one of the simpler newer killers in terms of their power. Blight's power allows him to sprint into walls or objects, bounce, and then run at high speeds with a lethal attack. He's like a really weird mix of Oni, Hillbilly, and Cannibal, except these lethal rushes will only do 1 health state, which is a little different to most of those other killers which do insta-downs. They are easier to pull off however, and the bounce tokens you have will recharge fairly quickly. Before we look at some of the downsides, let's consider some parts that are great about Blight, such as his kind of insane capability to traverse any given map at very high speeds. Blight kind of has the same issues as these lower down killers, which is that his power just isn't that powerful. It takes a lot more effort with all these lower guys to do well, and it's usually down to the player being a higher skill level and not so much to do with the Blight's abilities being strong enough to make up for the player's downfalls, or at the very least help them along. He's basically a slightly faster M1 killer. One small benefit is that with his bouncing he can break pallets, which can be quite helpful when trying to catch up, or if the survivors are prone to pre-dropping pallets. Overall though, Blight often feels like he can't quite cut it, and so he's here at 20. Trapper is here in the number 19 spot. I like Trapper a lot, and when you get relatively good with him, he can be a ton of fun. The one huge benefit to Trapper in my opinion is just how simple he is to learn. His power is bear traps. You pick them up, and then you place them down, and hope a survivor walks into one, or you can help guide them into one yourself. At the end of the day though, any killer that relies on RNG, a lot like I mentioned for the Pig, just isn't reliable enough to be put up into a higher ranking. The main thing that is inconsistent with the Trapper is his traps, which can often feel like they have a chance to release a survivor on the first escape attempt, but then other times on the 85th, It's this inconsistency that makes Trapper very unpredictable as a killer. Even when you trap someone, it never feels all too sure. A simple other factor is how long it can take to set up too. You actually have to go around the map and collect traps, which often have poor spawns, and then still the survivors have to be in the correct area once you have managed to place them, and at this they can still be disarmed. A big bonus to Trapper in my opinion is that he is quite accessible to all ranks and skill tiers because of how simple his power is, yet how much learning there is to do with it that can lead to quite a high skill ceiling. He's easily learned but hard to master, making him broadly quite accessible to everyone. However, his restrictions often feel like too many, with a lot of his power feeling lacking quite often, even with great trap placement. Trapper is in need of some quality of life changes. Clown is here at number 18, despite often being considered to be the worst killer in the game. A huge reason why I don't think this is true is that a lot of people don't really know how to counter the Clown, especially newer or less experienced players. It can lead to a lot of pre-dropping pallets and easy hits when playing Clown. Clown also has a pretty strong power when used correctly, his bottles, which both slow down and distort the survivor vision whilst they remain within its pink cloud. These bottles are great too because they can actually be used at quite a considerable range. One of my favourite things to do with Clown is to basically toss bottles really high across structures, walls and whatnot, and just like mortar them over if I think a survivor is there. This makes Clown have an interesting but very fun learning curve. Clown's main strength of course is his ability to close off loops. When you slow survivors down, especially on tight loops, it becomes very hard to counter Clown. So again, newer survivors are going to struggle with this restricted movement. Even more experienced players will, for the simple reason that Clown doesn't appear very much. So a lot of people don't know how to counter him. Along with this, Clown gets a good range of add-ons, some of which have quite powerful effects. Clown's main downside in my opinion is that his bottles are limited and need to be reloaded. They can also feel inconsistent and often not quite feel enough when trying to pressure survivors and maintain map pressure in general. Number 17 is the Shape, or Myers, or Michael. The Shape is a killer that has a scaling power from tier 1 to 3. Each tier making him more powerful and each tier gained through stalking survivors. Tier 3, once reached, will make all survivors exposed and also make you faster. Myers is kind of hit and miss in my opinion, as he requires some skill for sure in that you have to be sneaky in how you go about stalking, but also knowing when to hit instead and apply some pressure, as well as maximizing the potential of his tier 3, which can go by fast if you're not too careful. The best strat usually being to slug any down survivors during tier 3 to maximize this shortened amount of time when your power is heightened. One huge benefit to Myers is that he has very strong add-ons, loads of which give him the option to straight up Mori people if he wants to, as well as have never-ending tier 3. My main gripe with Myers is what can often feel like inconsistency and also somewhat luck in the map and map spawns you get. Too many windows and pallets make Myers a dull boy. Whenever playing Myers, there's always got to be a consideration that your early game will be slow, which can be tricky for both new and experienced players alike. However, the payoff is often enough to turn the tables, as Myers is easily the top 5 of killers when it comes to quickly snowballing downs. Wraith is 16. Wraith can become insanely good in my opinion with use of some of his best add-ons, some of which are yellows and so very common, like the Bone Clapper. There's also his Silent Bell, which can honestly feel unfair on occasion, especially on maps with lots of corners and lack of long range visibility. It becomes a guessing and prediction game of where you're coming from. Same goes for the Bone Clapper to an extent. All of his add-ons in fact are very good, as well as quite fun and unique. For newer players and higher ranks, Wraith can be a hard killer to face. I remember when I started DBD, Wraith was by far the hardest killer to counter because my awareness that early on was very poor. This of course is a drawback later on, when you get into the lower ranks and higher skill tiers, as most red rank survivors will be pretty attentive and most likely will spot you coming unless you plan your approach properly. So although Wraith is a very simplistic killer with a simple cloak, uncloak power, he most definitely has a skill gap and a decent amount to learn for everyone who plays him. A huge drawback that Wraith faces is the fact that he can only be in one place at any given time, meaning his map control is quite poor, and you'll often find you'll have to opt for a tighter gen patrol strategy over anything else. Doctor is here at the number 15 spot, and in all honesty he's a killer I've never particularly liked or been that good with, but I think his simplicity is one of his greatest strengths, especially since his rework. The Doctor is up there for killers I would recommend to very new players who want to learn the basics of playing killer. A large reason being the Doctor's quick and easy capability to locate survivors, which can often be a tricky thing early game, and even more so as a new player if you have no clue about general spawns and such. He gets two different types of shock, one that covers your entire tear radius, which has a long but not too bad of a cooldown, and then you also have a smaller shock which is generally used to shock on loops, as shocking with Doctor stops survivors briefly from interacting with windows or pallets, making it easier to secure a hit unless the survivor decides to pre-drop the pallet. Personally, I don't feel that there is much complexity to Doctor, but this really works in his favour. Everything for him is quite straightforward, but he does it well and efficiently. Doctor can be played well by just about anyone, I think. The twins are a new addition to DBD, and they are here at number 14. This will certainly be a controversial one, and hey, maybe my opinion will change, as we're still fairly early days with this killer. But in my opinion, the killer has the potential to do very well as long as you make sure to utilize both Charlotte and Victor and not try and focus one of them. They're a team, and you really need to play them that way. Use them almost like you're using a portal between the two. These killers basically allow you to teleport across areas of the map, which is one of their biggest strengths when used well. Map control. The twins' main power is their ability to switch between one another. Charlotte is the larger character who can M1 and also hook the survivors, and Victor is the smaller and younger brother who can run quickly, pounce, and also attach to survivors as well as trap them in lockers. The twins in general have had a really bad rap since release day, but honestly give them a chance and a little bit of time to learn, as they can seriously be a powerhouse, especially once you get your positioning down. Although I do think this killer is quite hard, I think they can be used well by new players too. They seem even more effective in regards to higher ranked, newer players too, because they have so many little inbuilt helping hands, like Victor's ability to reveal survivors after attaching to one. Information as a newer player can always be really valuable. Ghostface is coming in here at number 13 and has a good case for this spot, as I would argue he is the stealthiest of the stealth killers in the game. Ghostface's main ability is his stalk, which is kind of similar to Myers, except it doesn't work collectively, it works for individuals. Each time you complete a stalk action, the survivor you stalked will become exposed. The benefit of this in comparison to Myers though, is that Ghostface can do it far quicker, despite it lasting for less time. Ghostface, when in his stalk mode, Night Shroud, also becomes undetectable and can both lean around corners and crouch for better angles, making him very effective at what he's built to do. Even without his power active, he is a pretty good standard M1 killer. New players can do well with Ghostface 2 due to his simplicity, where even if you aren't great with the power, Night Shroud making you silent is still going to really help. For more experienced players, things such as the crouch can become key parts to pulling off interesting tricks and gaining sneaky hits. Overall, Ghostface is straightforward, fun, and accessible. Our number 12 spot goes to Legion. A lot of people say Legion is bad or weak due to the many nerfs they've had over the years, however I would argue that they're still pretty formidable. A core reason being their ability to injure a full team in a very short amount of time, and the fact that landing hits with their power allows you to pretty heavily slow down the game, especially against teams who are dedicated to healing, which a lot of low skill level teams will be, as newer players are often quite scared if they get injured. I know I used to hate being injured early on when I started playing. Legion's main power allows them to sprint and hit survivors into the deep wound status effect, which means the survivors need to stop and heal themselves, and then also be healed out of their regular injured health state to return to full health. A huge reason why people hate Legion is that it is really annoying to play against, especially when done well. The constant healing, or the constant deep wound, can be pretty tiring. Their power is not just for injuring though, it's also a great information and location tool that will reveal survivors after landing your first swing. Legion's main downfall in my opinion is that if everyone decides not to heal, which many teams will, he basically returns to being a basic M1 killer. Hillbilly is our number 11, a killer who I am not so great with, but recently I've had a lot of fun learning, and so he comes in here at the midpoint of this list. Since his nerf earlier this year, he is definitely weaker, although I don't think quite to the extent that people have been saying. Hillbilly still has a lot of positives, big ones being his movement speed, which is still one of the fastest in the game at 9.2 meters per second, which is double a regular killer's walk speed. This is the speed he gets when in his chainsaw sprint, which is his power. This allows him to move at high speeds and also insta-down survivors if he lands a hit with it. My main difficulty with Billy is the chainsaw's turning circle and control, although this can be helped along by add-ons. The other issue I have is that colliding with objects will break you out of your sprint, unlike Oni's charge. His overheat however isn't that big of a deal in my opinion, and in general Billy remains very good still. I also think he's pretty accessible to everyone, just due to his simplicity, but also the potential he has when played by an experienced player. Cannibal is our number 10, and a character that a year ago you would not have seen this high up the list. A bit like Clown, he's always been considered to be pretty low tier and not so great. Since his rework though, Cannibal is honestly a pretty great contender when it comes to killer strength. Bubba's power allows him to rev up his chainsaw and swing it side to side at a higher speed of 5.29 meters per second. With this new addition of his chainsaw charges, you can extend the time he swings the chainsaw for, which now makes him very capable on loops, even some of the larger ones, for insta-downing survivors or forcing them to drop pallets. That's a big one for Bubba. Although his power has been changed for the better, his add-ons have remained alright. Nothing to really shout about, but all relatively solid. One of the huge benefits of Bubba is his ability to down multiple survivors, with a good success rate too. Also in regards to his teachables, they now pair pretty well with his new loadout. So if you're new, Bubba's a good choice to learn generally how DBD works, or how insta-down killers work, before you move on to someone like Hillbilly say, who is a little bit more tricky to use. Overall, very solid killer who's been completely turned around by reworks. Deathslinger is our number 9, and honestly, he's not a killer I particularly like, but I feel due to his lack of counterplay, often he is quite an effective killer, and again, he's a killer that can be played by someone new or someone more experienced, and either are likely going to have fun but also perform well. This is partly because of Deathslinger's power. His spear gun relies on being able to aim well, which is a pretty common skill that most people have learnt regardless at some point, even if it's in a different game, meaning the initial experience with Deathslinger is good, because it's simply relying on this transferable skill of aim. And again, for a more experienced player, this is just something they will have honed down. Deathslinger is a great sneaky alternative to Huntress, who's always humming as Slinger has a small terror radius, his main downfall being that he can be a little slow sometimes and his map control can be hard to retain, but as long as you're hitting shots and finding survivors, you should be able to perform well with him. As again, his greatest strength is that there's little counterplay for him, as his power is more reliant on the killer messing up and not so much the survivors. Hag is here at number 8. This is lower than some of you might think she should be, and I agree if this were a list for just best players at the best ranks. However, for newer and less experienced players, Hag is quite hard to play. The only redeeming thing to this difficulty is the ease of use that is the strat of camping with Hag, which is by far the most likely strategy you'll see with Hag at higher ranks and lower skill levels. Hag is probably the best area control killer in the game for her ability to corner a team extremely easily. If you get into a 3-gen against a good Hag, at that point the game is over. As I said though, there is most definitely quite a large skill gap when it comes to Hag. I feel pretty competent with Hag, but I realise I still have a bunch more to learn about her add-ons, strategies and perk combinations that can optimise my play with her. Hag's main strength comes in the fact that your power is a teleport, an often guaranteed hit, and finally an information tool, all in one. And unlike Trapper, you get 10 of these traps that you can place relatively quickly and without a need to collect them. You just get them right out to begin with. Hag can be insanely good, but she also takes a decent amount of learning to play her effectively, without simply camping. Plague is our killer here at number 7, and she earns this spot by being capable of very efficiently injuring entire teams with a decent ease, from where the only option is to cleanse, which then buffs her even more with pools of corruption. Plague's main power is her Vile Purge, which is a stream of vomit that doesn't injure survivors unless you've landed enough of this sick onto them by spewing it at them. Pretty grim stuff, I know. Once you have hit them with it enough, it'll make them injured, broken, which means they can't heal, and also they'll be intermittently sick, which can be used as a great location and information tool. Once sick, survivors will have to cleanse to be healthy once more, which unlocks your Corrupt Purge, which is red vomit that damages for a single health state. This stuff is very good. Along with all this, Plague gets some of the best add-ons in the game. She has some really strong stuff in her loadout, both for information and also just straight up power. Her add-ons are really great. The only drawback to Plague in my opinion is that she can be a little tricky to learn as a new player. However, if you're also playing against someone less experienced, then they'll likely cleanse a lot, giving you a lot of your power and making it a whole lot easier. Executioner is our number 6, and a killer I love, and you'll know this if you've seen my videos before, because he has so much to his power and has a pretty wide range of interesting abilities that can be used in many different ways with a good variety of strategies. Executioner is able to do a bunch, such as shoot his ranged attack through walls and pallets, allowing him to get hits even when at a distance or mid-chase. This ability is really good, and honestly it's a key thing to be used over your M1 now due to the cooldown nerf. Executioner is one of the only killers in the game that can actually circumvent perks like Unbreakable and DS, as he can cage people, which is like an instant hooking mechanic, which can save time and help you to not worry about losing pressure. The only drawback being that you do lose the location of the survivor you cage. Once a survivor has been hooked or caged twice and is tormented, You can also mori them, which is pretty cool, and again, saves time. Pyramid Head is also pretty accessible, I would say, to most people, although he is definitely more suited to more experienced players, as being new and starting out with him can feel a little punishing. However, he can still be really great, due to the fact that he has so many counters to meta perks and looping strategies. It's hard to go wrong with him, and so he's here at number 6. Huntress comes in at number 5, a spot she gains due to her high ease of use, and further her high payoff. Huntress is an incredibly simple killer, with her power consisting of hatchets, that she can throw and then reload at lockers, with each of them damaging for a single health state. Huntress is still the best range killer in the game in my opinion. As I said for Deathslinger, ranged or aim-based killers are good for new and experienced players alike, as they rely mainly on the transferable skill that is aim. If you can aim, you can basically do well with Huntress. A small drawback to Huntress is that she has to reload, which in many ways can slow you down and loosen pressure. However, if you simply manage your hatchet throws well, you should barely ever be caught out without them. This can also be somewhat solved by her add-ons, which can increase hatchet amount, make her hatchets insta-downs, and also apply helpful effects like Exhausted for up to 90 seconds. Huntress is simple and she gets big points for that, as she has a great power despite this simplicity. Number 4 is Nurse, the killer who is probably the most regularly considered to be the best. She's here at number 4 though for this list, as I think despite the fact that she is incredibly strong, and has been for a long while now, she's also very hard to master. I'll be straight up honest, I'm not that great at Nurse. Where I can play a character like say Trapper fairly well despite little practice, I can't do the same with Nurse, even though they're both hard killers, as the entry point for her power is quite high. This is why she isn't higher on the list. Nurse for new players is pretty hard, and so I feel she doesn't define that idea of the best killer in the game. With this said, if you can play her well, she's insane, simply for the fact that she can phase, or teleport basically, I guess, around the map with use of her power, Blinks, each of them giving her a brief window to swing after using the blink. Nurse is one of those killers that will always be there in sweaty tournaments and low rank, high skill games, as she has very little drawbacks. She can move around the map quickly, has great snowball potential, and can end chases quickly and has a very solid base kit. Add that she requires nothing really to make her good or viable. Everyone knows Nurse is good, so here she is at number 4. Oni is coming in here at number 3, a very strong and also fun killer to play against, who's pretty easy to learn, although maybe slightly harder to master. Nothing to the extent of Nurse for example though. Now I may be a little biased to Oni here, as he has been the closest thing to a main for me for a while now, but I still think he's pretty deserving of this spot. Oni's main power relies on gathering blood, which you do from hitting survivors who will then drop it. Once gained, you can go into a rage type mode and sprint at very high speeds as well as insta-down. Oni is pretty power reliant, I'll be honest, and he can often have very slow starts to games. However, I also think he is the best killer to snowball games with in the game. The potential he has to go from target to target in his sprint is just really high and great. What makes him even better is his very forgiving movement when in his sprint, which allows you to collide with different objects without being broken out. To boost him even more, you can get great add-ons that reduce charge time and also extend Blood Fury, making you pretty unstoppable once you have enough people injured and constantly dropping blood. It basically turns into an endless power. Oni is fun, accessible, and powerful. Our number 2 spot is going to the Spirit. A very strong killer with, in my opinion, the least amount of counterplay out of all the killers in the game. There is definitely an argument for her to be first place here, but she loses out as I feel she is a little hard to learn as a newer player, which means she can't quite steal the top spot. Spirit's power is simple. She can phase walk. She goes invisible briefly and can no longer see survivors while doing this, but can move faster and see scratch marks, so you can still figure out location. This is where she can't get the number 1. I feel like her power's a little tricky to play with early on, where say you could pick up Huntress or Oni and get into how they work pretty easily. Spirit takes a little while to figure out with her tracking. Do not misunderstand me though, her power is insanely good, as when she phases she leaves behind a husk, and also the survivors can't see you, so they can't tell when you're phasing, or for how long, or where you are, so they basically have to guess. The counter is literally guesswork. This means you will pretty consistently manage to get a hit every time as long as you track them properly, which often isn't too hard. Spirit makes loops near impossible. She even makes strats like W keying for survivors hard, as they can't force you to chase them for ages like many other killers by running in a straight line. Basically, Spirit is just kind of insane. The Nightmare or Freddy is coming in at the number 1 spot. This is going to be a fairly controversial one, as it's pretty widely accepted that Nurse or Spirit are the strongest killers. However, again, for the wider player base, especially at higher ranks and lower skill levels, Nurse is much harder, same as Spirit. Freddy is a killer that can be played well by anyone, as most of his abilities are passive, and even the ones you directly control, such as the snares, have basically no drawbacks or ways you can use them poorly or incorrectly. He's like a super forgiving and highly powered killer, so in my opinion you simply can't go wrong with him. His main power and his best is his snares, which you can place quickly, best used on loops to slow down survivors who trigger them so you can get easy hits. Freddy also has the Dream World, which makes his direction and also visibility very difficult for survivors to discern. He can also teleport from gen to gen on a shortish cooldown, so he has great map control too. Yeah, basically he's just really great, and he steals this #1 spot for the simple reason that he is simple. I would somewhat even go as far to say that you don't need much experience or skill to use Freddy at all. He's almost like a tutorial killer who buffs you as the player in a ton of ways to make your life super easy and allow you to perform well. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. I do hope you enjoyed. Be sure to drop your own list down below. Thanks, and goodbye.